Welcome back to the Discipler Group. Today is the third and last part in our series on stewardship. I know many of you have been working on stewardship issues this fall and helping your congregation to be faithful stewards. I'm grateful for all that you're doing. Today we have with us Darrell Williams, who's going to talk about how to talk about money in the church. I know many people don't like to talk about money in the church. When you read the Gospels, you find Jesus talking about money all the time. Jesus just understood money as a resource for getting done God's work, God's ministry within the church and through the church and out into the community. Jesus always wanted to talk about money with people because he saw it as such an important element in their lives and in their relationship with God. So we're glad that Darrell has come to talk about how we can talk about money within our congregation. Darrell is the pastor of the Upper Marlboro congregation, and we give thanks for his ministry there. Again, thank you for coming. We look forward to our continued ministry together.
Sometimes pastors find it difficult to talk to their congregations about money. The big reason is because we don't want to seem like God's bill collector. And the truth of the matter is, as God's bill collector, we become unpopular and our ministry becomes unfinished because we get to a point where we think that our congregation will be looking at us as somebody who's always trying to either get into their pocket or get into their checkbook. The truth of the matter is, as a pastor, we have an obligation to talk about money. It's not whether we talk about money, it's how and when we talk about money that really matters. The how and when of it is really based on what your personal style is and what the vision and the themes and the lifeblood of your church are. The truth of the matter is, we can't really avoid talking about money. If we avoid talking about money, we exempt ourselves from talking about a large part of the spiritual lives of people. One of the things surveys have told us is that our parishioners want to talk about money. They want to know, what is God's plan for my money? What is God's plan for my finances? And that's really been something that people have wanted to talk about in both good times and bad times. During times of prosperity, people are always wondering, what should I do with the blessings that God has given me financially? In times of financial crisis like we're living through today, people are wondering, where's God's plan in this? What do I do, and how do I make ends meet, and how do I still serve God? The truth of the matter is, simply, as pastors, we have to help guide people with this. Helping people with their money, their stewardship, and their financial obligations is just as big an obligation as helping them with their prayer lives, scripture reading, or any of the other spiritual disciplines that we want to maintain for people. Jesus talked more about money than anything else in the Bible, and he was never fearful for doing it because of the simple fact that if we don't do it, then we leave that to somebody else to do. Now, there's nothing wrong with financial planners, there's nothing wrong with stockbrokers, there's nothing wrong with any of the other people that give financial advice, but the Bible is very clear about what we should be talking about and how we should address our money. Going so far back to John Wesley had specific plans. He said, earn all you can, save all you can, give all you can. We have a tradition of being able to talk about money, but it's how we do it that will make the difference. The how is to make sure that we're not approaching money from a selfish standpoint. We don't always want to talk about money from the standpoint of what the church needs. When we talk about money from the standpoint of what the church needs, it's always thinking about a selfish impact on, if you don't give, we don't have. And that's not really what people are looking for. They're looking for, how do I maintain? Because when we talk about the bills of the church, when we talk about the obligations of the church, people are usually thinking, well, I've got bills and obligations myself that I'm trying to meet, and I want to give, I'm just not sure how. So the how of it, we have to talk about money in non-threatening places and in non-threatening ways. The non-threatening places and non-threatening ways are talking about money outside of the stewardship campaign every year. Money has to be a year-round topic, but not a topic that's directly always related to giving. Sometimes we need to talk about, what would Jesus have us to do for saving? What would Jesus have us do for spending? What would Jesus have us do around lifestyle? Because all of those things impact money. As a pastor, we're trying to help people live full Christ-centered lives. And one of those things is helping people understand how Christ would have you spend your money. After all, the Bible tells us that the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. Therefore, therefore, our wealth is not really ours. It belongs to God in the first place. So we're really helping people interact with God around a specific subject, and a specific subject that has a spiritual basis. Money is one of the last trip-ups that people have in faith. People will give their time, they will give their talent, they'll give of their prayer lives, they'll read the scriptures, but when you get to talking about money, that's usually the last frontier, when people say, now you've gone too far and you've started meddling. But it's our job to go too far. The same way it's our job to talk to people about having active prayer lives, the same way it's our job to talk to people about feeding the hungry and clothing the naked and being good people and having spiritual lives, it's our job to talk to them about money. So how do you do it? You do it through a number of ways. We have to preach on money. And preaching on money doesn't always mean preaching things like the parable of the talents. It doesn't always mean preaching from Malachi and saying, give unto God what is God's, and saying, well, render the full tithe because will a man rob God? Those are not the things that we're always talking about with money. Sometimes when we're talking about money, it's as simple as talking about the widow's mite and how the widow gave not out of her abundance, but out of what she didn't have. She gave everything that she had because she knew that God would supply. Sometimes in talking about money, we don't want to talk about the money itself. We want to talk about what the source of all of our wisdom, all of our wealth, and all of the other things we have, and that's God. Getting people to have a theological understanding of where wealth comes from is the first part of the how. The how is, how do you have what you do have? And the answer is, you have it from God. That gives you a break-in to talk to people about a number of things. And once you get people to understand the spiritual ramifications and the spiritual implications of money, it gets easier to talk to them about what to do with their money. And the reason it gets easier is simply, now they're not looking at it from a financial standpoint, but they're looking at it from a spiritual standpoint. Another way to talk about money is to talk about it during Bible studies. Do a Bible study about what God says about money and never mention giving. Because if you do a Bible study about what God says about money, giving naturally comes up, but it doesn't have to be the focus. When we focus on giving, people believe that we're asking them for something. And we're not asking when we're talking about money. We're giving a resource for how to have a more fulfilled, God-centered life. If we have more fulfilled, God-centered lives, we understand more easily what God wants us to do around money and what God needs us to do around money. And what God needs is for us to be His hands on this side of the Jordan. God needs us to be able to feed the hungry, to clothe the naked, and do ministry. And when you talk about money from what God wants us to do, people will catch on to the vision. The last piece in the how is that you have to talk about the vision that you have for the church and the vision that you have for what you're doing. When you have a vision for what you're doing and it's God-centered, God-ordained, and God-led, people will catch on to that vision and ask, how can I be a part of that? How can you be a part of that? Well, there are always several parts to being a part of the vision. You have to be a part of the vision by participating. And participation comes from being in leadership or not in leadership. But it comes from being prayerful. It comes from giving of your time. It comes from giving of your talent. But it also comes in providing the resources for us to do ministry. We as Methodists have a long history of doing ministry both here and abroad. But every time we do ministry, we're reaching out from the coffers that God has provided us with to give back to others because of how much God has given to us. So the how is very simple. How? Through your preaching, through your teaching, and through incidental conversations when people are talking about money. It's not always what can you give. Sometimes it's what you get back by doing what God would have you to do. Another part of how to talk about money is talking without talking. As pastors, we have to be examples of how to talk about money. And the how is, how do we live our own personal and spiritual lives? People have to trust you to know that you're not just preaching, but you're practicing what you preach. As a pastor, it's important to be an example. And as an example, that means that people have to believe when you speak. Believe that you're not only saying it, but you're doing it. For a lot of us, that becomes a tricky situation. Let's be honest. None of us got in this business to get rich. So we're all working on what I like to call fixed incomes. And our fixed income is we're going to get what we're going to get. But we have to be able to give in a way that people understand that we too are giving. We too are people who are giving of our time, giving of our talents, and giving of our treasure. As a pastor, you have to be a paradigm of integrity and an example of generosity. And that generosity comes in a lot of different ways. But the first one is that you have to be an active giver in your church. As a pastor, you have to be a person who can say, I give because the Lord instructs me to. I give because it's a piece of my faith. And I give because I support the ministries here as well. Our giving personally will be an effective example to people of what personal giving looks like. In most of our churches, people know exactly what we make, which means that if we're generous givers, they know that we're not giving because we have a lot, but we're giving because we're being faithful. And that personal example will be the type of example that other people will look for. The other thing about talking about money is that you can't be the only voice. You have to have a team of people around you who are also willing to talk about money. And it's important that those people not only have credibility in the congregation, but that they are also givers. You can't have people talk about giving who aren't givers. They have to be able to practice what they preach, which means that not only do you talk, but sometimes it's important to have people who you know are shy, but you know are also good givers to give testimonies about what giving means to them, about why they give, and about how they give. And giving for those people may not be the most natural thing, and speaking may not be the most natural thing, but that's actually a good thing. Because sometimes the most personal testimony is the one that's not polished. It's the one that's the most heartfelt. It's the one that you know comes from somebody who's saying, this is who I am, this is what I do. I'm not up here because I'm supposed to be up here, but I'm up here because the pastor asked me to talk about what I do. And because I give, you can see that you can give also. Because be very clear. Anytime someone stands up, everybody's watching and somebody's looking at them saying, wow, they give and I make more than they do, so I should be giving too. Somebody else looks at them and says, they give and I make less than they do, so I can probably give something. Every time somebody stands up to talk about giving, they should be a good giver, and they should be a person that the congregation can look to and say, I know who that person is. That doesn't mean that it should be the people that are always up front. Sometimes you've got to get a backbencher to step out of the shadows and get into the game. Because just like the young man who had never played basketball for his team before, but we've all seen the YouTube video that he came out and shot, I believe, 6 3-pointers in a row, sometimes it's the person on the end of the bench who can have the most impact on the game. But we've got to know who those people are, and that means getting the chance to really look at giving records. And for a lot of us, we don't want to know because we don't want to treat people differently based on what they give. But if we don't know, then we don't know how we can help, and we don't know who we can help. The truth of the matter is, people will come to us if their marriage is going in trouble. They'll come to us if their job has gone awry. They'll come to us if their children are in trouble. They come to us at the most personal times in life. Sometimes we've got to go to them about personal matters as well. And one of those personal matters is giving. You want to be able to talk to people individually, knowing what they've given, because sometimes you want to just thank people for how faithful they've been. Other times, you've got to step up and challenge people to give because they can be doing better, and it's what the Lord would call them to do. Now, that doesn't mean we want to be confrontational with people. What we want to do is, in loving ways, reach out and talk to them about their faith and about how their giving should interact with their faith. Another how is talking to people in non-traditional environments. Sometimes being called by the pastor or called into the pastor's office can feel like being called into the principal's office in the 5th grade. You're not sure what you did, but you're sure this can't be good. Sometimes you want to invite people out to do things that they just naturally do. Invite them for a cup of coffee at the local Starbucks or the local Seattle's Best. Take them bowling. It gives you a chance to be in a different environment and talk about different things. And when you're talking about different things with people, one of the great questions you can ask them is simply, how do you think things are going at the church? What programs do you like, and what programs do you wish we could be doing? When you ask people that, they'll begin to really open up to you and talk about how the ministry at the church is going. And they feel like you're really trying to get their opinion, which you are. Because by knowing what people want and what people need, we can better tune our ministries and our visions to meet the needs of the present day. And when they begin to talk to you, people will begin to talk about how great things are going in some areas and how other things need improvement. The follow-up question that you want to ask is, what would you be willing to do to make things better in the things that we're already doing and to help us launch new ministries? When people begin to talk about that, they'll begin to talk about the effort that they'll expend. They'll talk about how they can be a part of it by doing the work of the ministry. But the follow-up question that you want to ask them at the end is, what are you willing to invest financially to see these things happen? Because once people are excited about the vision and once they're excited about the ministry and they're willing to put in their time and their effort, they'll also be willing to put in their finances. So you really want to ask a person, what are you willing to invest to see our ministry grow? What will you do with your time? What will you do with your talent? And what will you invest with your finances? Because that's how we grow ministry. That's what God is calling us to do, and that's what we have to do. We have to get people to step up to the plate and say, I'm going to invest my time, my talent, and my treasure because I want to see the work of God take place in this part of the church.